Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I see some faces I know. Hello, David. Hello, everyone I know. And how lovely to see those of you who are new to these kind of panel events run by the Ollie Foundation. Um, so my name's Debbie Roberts. I'm the CEO here at the Ollie Foundation. And I just want to thank you for joining us for this really important lunchtime talk. I wanted to host this discussion because over the past year we've had growing concerns from parents, from educators, from clinicians about the ways early exposure to pornography can really interfere with a child's well-being, sometimes escalating into distress, and for a very small number, potentially increasing risks for suicide, for instance. This was underlined by two conversations that I had this year. One with a father whose son, a slightly older boy, teenage years, was suicidal, having become addicted to online porn, and then a quite spectacular series of events, including grooming, that had taken place. It really was very, very difficult for them. Another was a counsellor whose young teenage client was struggling with anxiety and depression, but the counsellor came to realise that at their core was that this teen, but as a primary student, had been assaulted by a classmate. But she didn't know what had happened to her. And you know what? Chances are the classmate didn't really understand either. Data changes all the time, but we do know exposure is common and often accidental. It seems that maybe up to 70% of our 16 to 21-year-olds have seen pornography, and 59% of those say it was accidental, and their average first exposure was around age 13. But as we will discuss later, many times it's much younger, and all of this data is available from the Children's Commissioner's report, and I do encourage you to look at that. Younger children are definitely seeing things they shouldn't, and the risk is on mainstream apps as well, something again I know that we will cover this afternoon. As a leader in the area of suicide prevention, it felt important to bring this discussion to my peers and colleagues. But other than sharing what I've already shared, I'm not really qualified to speak on this. So I have brought three incredible people who are together, people who can share what they're seeing, what they know, and what the research suggests, most crucially, what they have seen as effective for services, for schools, and for families. This is, of course, potentially a very distressing topic, and we intend for it to be a supportive conversation and knowledge sharing. However, at any point, if this doesn't feel supportive to you today, please do leave. Enjoy a nice walk or whatever amazing weather that you're experiencing today. We are recording this talk, and we very much hope to be able to put it on YouTube. We won't be sending the recording out though. We will also be sending out an accompanying resource document, and with that in mind, I'd like to honour the wisdom and the experience in this room. And I invite you all as delegates to populate the chat with the books, the support groups, the research, the links that you are aware of, that you have found useful in relation to our discussion. Now, we will end today's session with a Q&A, so please know that we can answer your questions at the end of the session. And the best way to ask your question is actually to pop it into the chat. Katie and Joe from the Ollie Foundation are here, and between us we will pick up all your questions and pose them to our panelists at the end of the session. We will likely focus on the questions that seem generic, in other words, are going to be most useful to most people in the room. If you have a very, very personal question, you're welcome to send that to us contact us at the Ollie Foundation. And please, I'm sure all our panelists would be happy for you to connect with them. And certainly via LinkedIn, you can do that. So let me introduce you. Kathy Weston is a criminologist by background and now one of the leading national experts on parenting and parental engagement in children's lives. She established Tooled Up Education, a holistic bank of evidence-based resources for whole school communities on all aspects of parenting, family life and education. Nathan Jones is with us. He's a psychotherapist and the founder of the London Centre for Addictions. He's dedicated his life to helping people with substance abuse and sex and pornography addiction. Inspired by his own rehabilitation journey, he speaks at international conferences, particularly on pornography addiction and the inner child model, and he has developed his own integrative approach. And Anna Sargenston is the founder of ScreenSafe, helping parents, carers, schools, and professionals keep children safer in the digital world. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for your time today. And let's get straight into this. I wanted to ask, in your own practice, in your work experience, what is the level of problem that you're seeing? And what do you think parents and schools need to know that they might not actually be aware of?
I can start. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. Thank you for inviting me today. So as Debbie just introduced there, I work a lot with parents, either via schools or directly with them and families and children. And I think one of the big areas I'm trying to support in is bridging that gap of knowledge and that awareness, and that lack of awareness that we have of many people of our generation who are carers or working with children, of understanding what we're dealing with when we're talking about pornography nowadays, and understanding that we've gone way beyond a bit of nudity or what many of our generation are thinking about pornography, and actually the level of harmful, really disturbing content that young people are being exposed to, which is still being classed as pornography, but actually most of us would class that as abusive material, child sexual abuse material, really horrific content that we as adults can't process and deal with. So for me, a big part of that is raising awareness amongst those of us who work with children day in, day out, or have our own children. And we need to bridge that gap so we don't dismiss this or just think it's an older problem or it's something that just older teens deal with. And start having those conversations, age appropriately, of course, but at a much younger age.
That's right. Thanks, Anna. And as a criminologist, I've spent many years trying to raise awareness amongst parents as well and teachers about the actual nature of pornographic content these days. So we know from people like Fiona Vera Gray's work, a great criminologist in the country who's done an enormous review of the 3 biggest pornography sites in Britain. For example, a third of the content will generally depict violence against women. It is a racist world as well, the world of pornography. It is sexually violent. And we know from her work that the algorithms will move the first-time user, and we know some of those first-time users might be 10, 11, 12 years of age, even younger in some cases. Algorithms are moving them towards particularly sexually violent content. So the criminologists are looking at this, psychologists, people like Ellie Hansen from Fully Human, looking at the impact of deeply disturbing material. As Anna just referenced, this is not just sexual relations that older generations might consider to be, in inverted commas, pornographic. We're talking about material that can often depict non-consensual sex. Incest is a very popular category within the world of pornography. That those are deeply disturbing and upsetting things for parents often to consider. And in my work, we are seeing the kind of the sequelae of that. In school environments where you might see, for example, older teenagers with strangulation marks, the consumption of pornography leading to shaping and influencing how young people consider that sexual relations should be, how their bodies should look, and how they should approach many of this. And the biggest danger of all is that pornography becomes, the PSHE, the national PSHE curriculum for all our young people, and it's going to take a collaborative effort to care about this topic, to challenge this topic, and to see the intersection between the consumption of pornography, mental health, well-being, and how young people interrelate, and how they bring this knowledge into sexual knowledge into their adult relationships, which I'm sure Nathan, can talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Thank you, Anna. I think from my perspective as a psychotherapist on the front line, working with people with compulsive sexual behavior disorder, the scary thing is that there is research out there saying it's 13 is the first age of exposure. I would challenge that. Within my clinical experience, the age is around, in my own research, 9 years of age. So primary school children are accessing this material. And that is the biggest thing, I think, as a parent myself, is that schools really need to understand that if children have a smartphone in primary school, there's a high chance they've came across this material, whether accidentally or they've heard from a friend in school, they will have accessed this material. And the problem is like a tsunami at the moment that we're seeing. More and more people, especially since COVID, there's been an exponential rise of youngsters coming in for help. And the question I first ask, when did you first access the material? And it's always around the age of 9. And I think that's the biggest thing I would like to say today is to be mindful that anyone with a smartphone, that they will have come across some material, not just on pornographic websites. Now we've got all the social media apps that it comes on, things like Discord, Telegram. It's just a whole new ball game now that the internet's created, and it's created what we call more of a contemporary addiction, where in the past addiction was thought of attachment or trauma, but now we see the more contemporary elements, especially with pornography, the AAA engine, accessibility, affordability, anonymity, and the ubiquitous nature of the internet. People are just becoming, hooked from early exposure rather than there being a traumatic event. So for me, it would be, yeah, it's like a tsunami.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. And I think I just wanted to mirror that as well of what I'm seeing and hearing of, again, making the awareness of how accessible this is. That's another gap of knowledge, I think, of not realizing this isn't about children going out and putting in a pornographic website or specifically searching for something explicit. They are getting sent links on WhatsApp group chats that just immediately open into really disturbing content. One of the triggers for me starting this work was my daughter's own experience of this, of a young age, when she had a WhatsApp group and was sent horrific footage that thankfully I intercepted and I saw first. But that was a video from 10-year-old boys of a rape scene, horrific content that thankfully I'm just so glad I saw it. And I was traumatized for the several other videos that I'm not going to go into that came. And this was from primary school boys that were just having that one up of let's send something else more shocking. And this is by no means saying this is a boy issue, because it absolutely isn't. It's across the board. But that awareness of this is everywhere. Pornography is on Spotify. You put sex into the search bar in Spotify, which, let's face it, that's what a lot of children are going to do. And you will be shocked at the content that comes up. And obviously with Spotify, you can have images, you can have videos playing in the background, you can have sex noises, really offensive, graphic, sexual language and conversations before you go down the route of having Andrew Tate having a podcast on there and talking about exploitation and all these things. So it's raising that awareness again of this isn't children going and looking out for this. And if we block content and we age gate, obviously age verification is a big topic at the moment. Yes, absolutely. But TikTok, for example, if your child's got TikTok, they've got OnlyFans. And the real concern for me at the moment is talking with young girls, particularly, about this TikTok to OnlyFans sort of route of it's being glamorized, it's being promoted of this is a way to be a millionaire and live this lavish lifestyle, with young girls not understanding really what's going on in the background. And yes, they won't see that really graphic content from OnlyFans, but they see enough. Bonnie Blue has a very prevalent profile on Instagram, on TikTok. The language, the phrases she used, barely legal, very, very popular, promoting young girls dressed in school uniforms being handed to a group of men. That's on TikTok. And as we know, how many young children have TikTok from 7, 8 years old? So that's another big raising awareness, and for again, for teachers and anyone that works with children of how they're accessing this content.
That's right. And I think things like the sanitization of OnlyFans wrapped up as economic empowerment for young people is outrageous. And it's something we need to be sensitive to as educators and parents. We can't just go in, any of us, and tell children not to watch this stuff. You know, banning it, telling them not to do something doesn't work. From a very early age, we have to be saying, you know, that there are algorithms at work, there are people who make life choices that don't reflect our family values, what we believe. So we have to call them into these conversations in the very first instance. So alongside access to pornography, we have the intersection with all these other things, what's happening in the world, the intersection between violence and pornography. You know, young men within about 60 seconds will see violent content on social media. There was an enormous campaign by Vodafone looking at the rise of the algorithm, just telling parents that. So, and we know that parental controls are not always effective, and in fact it can be harmful to overly rely on them. We know that from Maria Stoylova's work at LSE. And instead, back to basics here, you know, opening up a dialogue. Have you ever heard of OnlyFans? I had to ask my own children that, and then we were able to scaffold that conversation about, you know, how you know, all children and young people will be curious. What do we do with our curiosity, right? Where are we going to find answers out, to find inspiration, to learn how to have a girlfriend or get a boyfriend? So you can hear how all of these areas intersect into an enormous kind of matrix or ecosystem that everybody will have to pay attention and play a part in.
Thanks, Kathy. I think I'd like to echo the promoting the healthy dialogue, because with the people I work with, I'll always ask them, you know, if parents caught you watching any material, and the answer is they were shamed or humiliated by watching that material. And what that does, we know that the big driver with, you know, sexual addiction, pornography addiction, is shame. And if we are shamed watching the material, the behavior further becomes secretive, goes underground, and that shame cycle is continually fueled. So I think a big part for me would be promoting healthy dialogue. If we did catch, you know, our children watching it, not just shame. It's absolutely crucial. I don't mean to preach. It's just seeing it in my practice. It just further fuels the capacity to become addicted in the long term. So I just wanted to add that, Kathy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so important, isn't it? And that can be very difficult for parents, because I've met parents whose children have viewed pornography all night at the age of 10, 11, you know, and they're angry, right? They're annoyed. They want to ask, why have you done this? What have you possibly seen? But it's so counterintuitive often what's best for children. Just being able to say, darling, I understand that you've been curious about that. I understand. I gave you that phone. You know, I have to take accountability for that. And I wasn't, you know, skilling you up in order to navigate some really challenging stuff. And we have to talk about what you've seen, how it makes you feel. That is one of the hardest things of all in parenting, isn't it, Anna? You know, you want to just, what? You know, you can feel how angry that might, and upsetting and distressing it can be. Like you've probably had phone calls from parents at, you know, early hours in the morning. They've seen their child's internet history. They cannot believe the stuff they've seen and they panic. But as you've just mentioned, Nathan, within that moment, we've got a lot of responsibility to bring them into that conversation, because they are safest when they can have that transparent dialogue with us on all matters, but particularly this topic, Anna.
Yeah, absolutely. And exactly that. I've had parents, and I've also had a lot of parents push back and say, I am not going to talk to my primary school age child about pornography because they don't need to know about that yet. And I'm not putting ideas in their head. They sort of have this fear that if we mention it to children, and I know I've had similar conversations around suicide ideation and self-harm content online, which we're not going to go into today, but that fear of, by talking about this, we're going to encourage children to go out and find it themselves. But as you say, actually, the vast majority of children are finding this without wanting to, and then they're struggling, and maybe they have started to go back and look at it again, but actually it's because they're trying to process it themselves, and they're going through all sorts of fears, which we can very easily forget being middle-aged. But you know, if we try and think back to when you were that age, how confused you are, how insecure you are, your body's changing, your hormones are all over the place, everyone looks differently. Now it's so magnified online, of as we touched on before, of this is what you should like, this is what boys like, this is what girls like to look at, this is how you're supposed to behave in a relationship. And for young people who are maybe starting to explore their first relationships, you know, I've got a tween and a teenage daughter, and the dating side, thankfully we're not in it at the moment, but I know it's coming, and that is a real worry of what are boys going to expect. You know, what's the chance of them being with someone now who hasn't been exposed to really graphic pornography? As you touched on, Kathy, going into schools and speaking to girls who are dealing with the fact that their first sexual experience involved pain, humiliation. It was recorded without their consent. They were made to do things they didn't want to do, and they've been left with marks, or, you know, and that's their first experience. And trying to process that, and again, not at all saying this is also happening to boys. This is, you know, the way it's impacting young boys and what they feel they have to live up to, and to be a man, to be a boy, to be a proper boyfriend.
I think the rise of online misogyny in general, so there's a slight, you know, as the parent of teenage boys, I know they will have been exposed to more online misogynistic content than, say, teenage girls, right? So the Andrew Tates, the toxic influencers, the you know, all of these things can feed into that. But I think that so that's why we need to care about, you know, algorithms, talking about algorithms. Even with 5 and 7-year-olds, you can do that. Just algorithmic literacy is a very important, algorithmic resilience is a very important antidote. Something that I wanted to raise, which will tap into the main objectives of the Ollie Foundation as well. There was a very interesting piece of research published in PubMed. I think it was by Alton et al. And they talk about problematic, you know, pornographic use. So really entrenched, as Nathan probably be able to give us a good definition of that. But amongst those young people where there were higher rates of suicidal ideation, one of the key sort of factors that motivated them was isolation and loneliness. And I think we've talked about shame. It can be an aggravating factor, but isolation, social isolation, loneliness, these can be chronic. These can be felt so deeply by children and young people off at university or college. And I think that that's something that we could all try and address a little bit more in our practice. It's something for parents to pay attention to, the role of social connection as a protective asset for mental health. And that is something that we can all more easily lean into, if that makes sense. Nathan, does that sort of feel familiar with you leading your practice about the role of sort of isolation in pornography use?
Yeah, most definitely. When individuals begin watching it, they then feel that shame, that secrecy, and then they begin to isolate. They begin to not engage with friends as much, not engage with any social or hobbies or interests, and then the isolation begins. But then it goes to, which a point I'd like to raise, is the escalation of the content as well. So most people will come across it, and it could be quite vanilla stuff maybe at the start that they go to. But over time, we've seen through the escalation process, they will move to different genres. So things such as, you know, incest, rape, you know, all other quite hardcore areas. And then the shame gets even greater. Therefore, the isolation gets even worse. And I'd like to say something and caveat this. It does not happen to everybody who watches pornography. Many people will watch it. There will be no issues. But I have seen in my practice, and I'm sure, Kathy, you may be able to concur, that individuals who came across pornography at such a young age and then became daily users in their teens can then escalate to illegal material, child sexual abuse material. I worked with a young chap called Josh, I'll never forget. Came across it at 9. He was a daily user at the age of 13. And by the age of 19, he'd been arrested for illegal images. And he always said to me, if it was any other problem, I'd have reached out sooner. If it was drink, if it was drugs, if it was gambling. And to go full circle to why we're here today, he had suicidal ideation. He was in the name in the paper, shamed on the sex offenders register. And he just wished he'd have come for help sooner. And he was caught by his parents watching it, shamed, humiliated, and vowed I would never tell them because I know what they think about it. Heartbreaking. And I don't mean to be scaremongering. It can happen to people, doesn't happen to everybody, but I have seen it in my practice where it's escalated so much. Hallmarks of addiction, the escalation of the behavior, the tolerance, the risky use, the continuation despite negative consequences. Heartbreaking. I'll never forget his story because it really hits me that he'd have asked for help sooner. Is that something you've seen, Kathy, as well, with your work as a criminologist, with the link with pornography?
Absolutely. So sex offenders, I don't have all the data with me, but I know that, that sort of propensity or attraction can be, particularly towards children, can be facilitated by pornography. And we know that kind of arousal, going into the kind of the sort of psychiatric side of it, early arousal to particularly problematic content like that, it sets a pattern, doesn't it, over time. And I think, this isn't a niche area. The sexualization of children is an ongoing battle. Girls in school uniform, like the Bonnie Blue ads, the stuff that's going on in the world of fashion, the sexualization of young children is an ongoing global battle. And we're seeing those narratives in so many different areas, and it links into our misogyny, it links into our approaches to sexual harassment on the street. All of those things feed that narrative that as soon as a child is of a certain age, it's okay to treat them like a sexual object, right? And something else I wanted to bring up that you mentioned, Nathan, the ways in which people find this content. The world of gaming, we know that gaming can be actually a very positive space, for example, for young men. There's lots of lovely evidence as to the positive of finding connection in the online gaming world. So gaming is not the enemy per se, but on many of those gaming platforms, there are games that glorify violence, sexual harassment, that glorify rape and torture scenes. I mean, this stuff, and we're just sort of skimming the surface of some of that stuff. And organizations like Collective Shout, their job is to try and help campaign to take some of those things down. So it is an ecosystem. It's not a sort of a dark corner activity. And there are many, many threads to it. And you can hear that this is a global issue, and sort of appreciating that is something that, again, we can, try and appeal to people in lots of different spheres of life to take an interest in.
One of the games I talk a lot about in school and with parents is Roblox, which I'm sure you've all heard of that. Incredibly popular with young children, huge platform of users, many of which are very young children. And the content that is on that platform, a platform that's designed and aimed at children, is just absolutely vile in terms of, again, games like Escape to Epstein Island, Run from Diddy, games where, again, they will go in and see a character being raped and not just seeing it, but you're hearing the noises behind that as well. Awful videos, strip clubs, drug use, again, just really graphic language. And I've had several instances where, again, children have been playing on this platform what they think, albeit innocently, and they've literally been lifted and moved into a different game, which has then been in some of these horrific scenes. And you've got children as young as 11, again, parents thinking they're in the corner of the room, I can see what they're doing, but if they've got a headset on, again, we don't know what they're hearing, what the language is, who's talking to them. Absolutely rife with predators and known to have child sexual abuse material traded on that platform. So again, it's as we've touched on before, just the ease of this. It is not a case of if your child sees pornography, it is a case of when, and then minimizing. Like you say, I'm not anti-tech. I don't believe in banning everything and that side, but I do believe that we need to do everything in our power to prevent children seeing the worst of this, and above all, be able to come to us, as both Nathan and Kathy have said, that the biggest thing we can control is the ability to make those young people in our lives, whatever capacity, feel safe coming to us when something goes wrong, or when someone makes them feel uncomfortable, or when they see something and think, that's made me feel a bit funny. Young children don't know that they've seen pornography. They've just seen something that made them feel scared, or now they're not sleeping at night, or they felt a bit sick, or they're worried that is this what grown-ups do? So again, it's not about the language either. It's just about that constant open dialogue of, we are that safe space. And as Kathy touched on, I've had my daughters come to me with some very eye-opening questions in the past, and I've always just said, I will always tell you the truth. It might be embarrassing and you might wish you'd never asked, but I will make sure that you know what that term means. And again, yeah, my daughter was just finished year 7. The language she was exposed to last year, she doesn't have TikTok, but she's seen plenty of TikTok, because so many, she's still seeing this content, and hearing about it, and hearing about people such as Bonnie Blue and the Bop House in America. So I've digressed there. I've gone off on a tangent, but
and again, that's a good example. The Bop House, where young women come together to create pornographic content, basically in a nice, fun house. It looks like you're with all your friends. Companies are now sending you products that you can unbox, and they're doing get ready with me videos. It is such a conflation between sort of marketing for skincare products, coupled with sort of self-objectification, economic empowerment. So you can imagine, as teachers and parents, one of the few antidotes here is getting in early, is finding a way of grounding children in values, human values, family values, digital values, school values, because they have to be anchored in something. And some children can be anchored very helpfully in cultural or religious values. But at the same time, we cannot have a situation where children, because of their religious or cultural background, do not feel comfortable telling their parents that they've seen something, and that's really challenging, right? So we have to bring parents along with us, give them social scripts, conversational scripts, to be able to have these dialogues in a way that's sensitive to, cultural background as well. So, everybody has their own family identity and values and cultural beliefs, but we have to find a way of reducing shame and increasing communication in all of these situations.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, because I did want to spend the rest of our talk looking at what works, what we've seen as helpful, and I wondered if anyone had an opportunity yet to explore the new curriculum that will be brought in 2026, but schools can bring it in as soon as they're ready, that looks at grief and suicide prevention. And in relation to what we're talking about now, have you been able to look at that at all, or have any comments on that? Kathy, I think you're nodding.
Yeah, so we've done lots of work on social connection, which we see as the lens through which a lot of people can go to town on that idea. The concept of belonging, of mattering. Do children feel heard, seen, and valued at school and at home? So belonging, mattering, all of those things are foundational elements. If a child feels like they belong to a school community, and I mean really like they matter in that environment, everything that they experience will have they will have a support system around that. So I think that, social connection is very, very important as a protective asset for whatever is coming along, and having pathways to support in school. It's not enough to have a poster on the wall. Do children feel like they can go to the head of pastoral care? Do they feel they want to reach out to their teacher or their geography teacher or their PE teacher? Who do they feel comfortable in that environment and really going to? So we've been thinking about other aspects such as AI, chatbots, where children are seeking support and help, which also leans into some of that material, on reducing suicide risk. So psychological safety plans, as you know well, Debbie, they don't need to be complex. They can just be making sure every single child in that environment knows who they can go to if they're sad, upset, struggling, and everybody is aware of who these children are. You know, knowing children in your community is a protective asset.
Thank you. Anna, what are you seeing in the work you're doing with schools? What great practice are you seeing out there?
I'm seeing, I think the big thing is when you go in and spend time with the teachers themselves, is they themselves are desperate. They know they want to do so much more. Obviously, what you find with teachers is they're so restricted already in terms of time and resources, but they recognise this has moved on so quick and so fast, and what they have to do, obviously from a legal point of view and from an Ofsted point of view, is just not enough in terms of, like you say, getting to know those individuals, getting to really understand the nitty-gritty of how are children experiencing this world. And I always say we've got to put ourselves in the place of the children and try and see this through their eyes, not as adults looking at this thinking this is horrific, this is just, we just need to stop it all and get off, but immerse ourselves as children. I think that's what teachers are now, you know, keen to try and understand, rather than coming from an authoritative point of view. It's like, I understand why at 11 all that matters to you is that you've got a TikTok profile and you want to upload this and all your friends are doing it, and I can see why someone offering you £50 on TikTok for a picture of your feet is really appealing, instead of the, you know, the judgmental, like, well, just don't do that, that's really dangerous, and putting up those barriers again of having that stage first before we start talking about what not to do and how to support them. But first and foremost, just coming to meet them where they're at and saying, I understand this is really hard for your age. There's so much out there. There's so much temptation. There's so much pressure to look a certain way, sound a certain way, do certain dances, do certain challenges, post certain number of pictures and be more provocative, and all that constant feedback they're getting from others as well, of who's the prettiest, who's the most sexy, who's the most attractive, you know, the rate me posts that they have out that go around schools of who would you have sex with, you know, first, and rating these, you know, pictures, and it just must be horrific to be trying to go through that. So I'm seeing with schools, it's very much about, right, let's first of all, let's just meet them where they're at, and let's get on their level so they feel heard. As Kathy said there, make sure that that child knows you're coming at it from I'm in this with you. We've not done this before. We didn't grow up with this. So I'm certainly not going to pretend that I know everything, but we're going to get through it together and make sure that you have a happy, healthy online life, and none of the really horrific stuff that we're talking about does happen.
And some of the language we could use with children, you know, the idea of a digital diet. You know, we always talk to children about healthy, nutritious diet. But what about their digital diet? They need to be agents. They need agency in this area. They're not at the mercy of the digital world. So we have to make sure they understand that they care about what's in their digital diet, that parents care about digital hygiene just as they care about their children washing their hands. What are their children doing online? So using consistent language like that can be very helpful, because a digital diet is something parents understand immediately. What is in my child's digital diet? And as you said, Anna, we're not anti-tech, far from it, right? We have to make sure we can amplify the fact that children deserve healthy, exciting digital experiences in their life. We're not trying to take that away from them. So it's about, you know, as parents and educators, using that language of balance, of digital discernment. So I remember writing a lesson plan for year 6 students whose parents didn't really want to talk to them about pornography, but we called it being discerning about digital devices. Being discerning is, if it's a big word, but it's an interesting word, isn't it? We have to be careful before we Google something. What might we see? What are we going to do in a moment where our friend sends us a link? So language is very, very important here, and using metaphors that are meaningful to parents and young people. So I always talk about the digital dustbin. Say to children, the internet's wonderful, but it's also a big stinky dustbin. You're not going to just go and put your hand in and rifle around. So children are obviously imaginative, they are curious. How can we, appeal to them and appeal to parents by using language instead of the word pornography, which is horrible? Can we find language in all of our practices that reaches them a little bit more easily than perhaps just that blunt word that conjures up immediate darkness?
Mm.
Nathan, in your practice, if you could sit down with maybe the parents or the education system that client of yours has come from, what would you want them to know?
I think it's again just open dialogue. I think to break through that shame, because it's a tough topic to discuss. I really do appreciate that. But and I always think if Josh's parents had just been able to speak to him openly, he'd never have, ended up at that point. So I think it would be that just open dialogue and to really realize that it's primary school kids are watching this content. I think because my wife's a teacher, so I have a bit of background into, things that do go on. And a lot of the time, it's just they're not interested in discussing it. Happy to discuss guns, knives, drink, drugs, but in public discourse, this is just completely left out. And it is harming so many people. And like I said at the beginning, it is like a tsunami. The amount of people who are coming to see me, the inquiries off the scale because early exposure to pornography, and that would be to really stop it at source. And I think to do that, I appreciate it's a fine line because there'll be many kids in primary school who haven't, come across this material. There will be, some. So we don't want to, expose them to it needlessly. However, I think there needs to be open dialogue and more public discourse around this material getting into the hands of young children whose brains are nowhere near developed to handle this potent supernormal stimuli.
Nathan, can I ask you something?
Of
And
course.
maybe Anna's had the same experience. When I'm delivering talks about pornography to parents, you can feel a kind of there are some parents who think pornography is a totally acceptable way to learn about sex. There are also a cohort of parents who may watch it themselves and feel too hypocritical to speak to their children about. And then there are the outraged who've never seen it. And I just wondered, we need to be very, very clear on what adults may choose to do. You've just mentioned brain development and, children and young people and teenagers, because sometimes the massive barrier for parents addressing these things is they feel hypocritical. And we have to acknowledge that, And I don't know if you've come across that, Anna.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a whole host of emotions, I think, as a result of talking about this. And it is like you say, there's some who you can literally feel them tensing up, thinking, why are we talking about this? My child's only 6. I don't want to have this conversation. And then others, as you say, and as you've touched on, Nathan, there could well be individuals in there who have their own shame and guilt and maybe their own feelings going on around this topic of how they're using pornography. And again, it's that brings up that issue then of like, they're not able to deal with their own feelings before starting to try and think about how it's impacting or their child viewing such content. And another thing I thought is just worth raising that I think we need to be speaking more and more about with everyone in this space is the legal consequences of what we're seeing online as well, of the ease at which children share these images between themselves, often of peers. So again, we can sometimes think pornography, we're talking about people on the internet that we've never met and we don't know, and they're porn stars. Again, this is not the world we're in now. This is images of children that are seeing images of other children in their school, which is not pornography. Obviously, it is child sexual abuse material, but really explaining to children about the severity and the consequences of why we don't just keep sharing on such content, and it isn't just a bit of a laugh. Again, we have nudify apps that have come into place, which is one of those where I just think, who the hell thought that idea up, and then who the hell signed it off as this is a good thing to be made available, that is now being used in schools and will undoubtedly cause absolute horrific trauma for some individuals, and in the worst instances, as we say, suicide ideation, along with sextortion. They can't see a way out of that. So the legal consequences, I think, is sometimes dumbed down or overlooked, of explaining to children, if you forward on that image, even though you're not in it and you might not know but you are breaking the law, and the police could be paying you a visit.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna. I think I just wanted to add on about you saying parents might feel a bit hypocritical because of their own use, and I think a lot of it, this is just my opinion, is their own shame about sex, how they've been raised, how they've been brought up. And when I run workshops for even therapists, the first thing I always say to therapists is, when they attend my workshops, if the only thing you get from my workshop today is you go away and ask your client about their sexual behaviors, I will be happy. Because even many therapists, because of their own shame, their own insecurities, will not ask their clients about their own sexual behavior. They'll ask about drug taking and alcoholism, but they will not ask about sexual behaviors because it's an uncomfortable topic. And I just wanted to caveat that it's hard for therapists, so I could even imagine it's even harder for parents to do. But like I say, I always go back to Josh. His parents would have, if they could go back now, they'd have bitten the hand off to be able to challenge him in that appropriate manner. So it's just something, and something also, just to add on, Anna, about sextortion, just completely digressing, something I'm seeing more of now as well. Individuals, again, porn's the gateway. And then, we've got webcams now, sort of chat rooms, all these other subsets. Sextortion, blackmail is something I see on a daily basis now as well. Just thought I'd add that on because it just prompted me to.
And sextortion, as Internet Matters have shown, is at a much higher rate now between 16 and 17-year-old boys tend to be predominantly targeted. And that's just at the age where parents think they can get on with it, that maybe all those chats were done with, they're 16, they're 17. So we have to keep these consistent dialogues, particularly at those older stages when maybe PSHE has died a few years ago. This is the time, late adolescence, early adulthood, where we actually have to lean in more. Sorry, Debbie, go ahead.
No, this is so important. Actually, I was going to come to some questions from our wonderful delegates. So we have a few, and before we run out of time, I wanted to get to them. So Susan asked, she says, I've read how children experiencing sexual abuse can bring on early pubescence, and witnessing abusive material will affect the body's chemistry, psychological responses. Could continual viewing of sexual content possibly bring on early pubescence, in your opinions? Is that something that you've experienced before?
I wouldn't feel qualified to. I'm not a medical, so biologically, I wouldn't be able to comment on that. I wouldn't feel qualified to answer that. Sorry.
Possibly Nathan might have a view.
I think because of the people who I work with, they're mainly over 16. It's, again, it's not really my sphere of expertise to be able to comment on that. Unfortunately, I can't say anything with any authority on that, I'm afraid.
No, that's fine, thank you. And Maya says there's a significant gap in the literature regarding the antecedent factors that influence adolescents' exposure to various forms of sexual explicit media. Could you discuss demographic variables such as sociocultural influences and individual personality traits? Is this something that you feel you could comment on, or any aspect of that question?
Can you just relay that bit again? Sorry, I heard
so
the different
are there any
demographics.
demographic variables, and for an example, sociocultural influences or individual personality traits? I guess we could look at neurotypical and neurodiverse, just girls and boys, but I think, Anna, you said very clearly at the top of this talk it's affecting everyone. So yes, any comments that you might have to address Maya's thoughts here?
Just from my own knowledge of things like ADHD, so not all young people with ADHD are going to be consuming pornography, but impulsivity in general is a risk factor. impulsivity is already a big component of adolescence, as we all know, but it seems that there is definitely evidence that, the combination of impulsivity, perhaps conditions, coupled with intense digital engagement can obviously, you can imagine why that might end up that young person has a higher chance of coming across material, and maybe also being attracted to the kind of the hit that you get when you're looking at particularly explicit or impactful material. I don't know if that's your experience from sort of psychotherapy practice, Nathan.
Well, compulsive sexual behavior disorder is actually an impulse control disorder in the ICD-11. So fully concur with what you said there, Kathy. But yeah, I would say about 70% of my clients now present with ADHD as well, with this behavior. So there's that sort of clear correlation with, attention deficit and, impulse control that we do see. So that is something that I do see now in my practice, most definitely.
And I think I would just say around the socio-economic point of that is, I'm always I would never say that this is happening to a certain area or background or race or religion or age group, because I think what we're seeing clearly is online harms across the board are happening everywhere. All we need is children and Wi-Fi, and the rest is and whether they are from the wealthiest, from the private schools, from the most deprived areas, single parent families, children in care, children. I've met plenty of children who on paper have the perfect world of, two parents living at home, good income, stable house, everything on paper they could wish for, and they are still having, things happening. So it's I don't think it's ever wise for us to start saying it's because of a certain demographic is more at risk.
Yeah.
Because we risk sort of diminishing the other children and people, that it is everywhere.
Well, it was a great question and a really good response, Anna. Thank you. Sorry, Kathy.
There's a forensic psychologist called Ayman El-Assam, Aiman, and El-Assam. He writes a lot for Internet Matters, and his work has proven that children who are psychologically vulnerable offline are the most vulnerable online. So it's not rocket science, that point, but it's an important point. Where you see psychological vulnerability in other areas, often they will be more vulnerable online. And there's loads of comorbidities in his work between things like, internet, digital diets, consumption of difficult material, eating disorders, sometimes neurodiversity, lots of comorbidity. So his work is really interesting, and I would urge you to look him up, Ayman El-Assam. And the other point I wanted to make before I forget is the work of Internet Matters is really important. We should all have a tab to Internet Matters, I think, on our laptops. Internet Matters podcast would make you stay up at night, because they are on the front line. They are removing child sexual abuse material every single day from their office in Cambridge. They are fantastic because they keep us in the loop, and they have shown that even 3 to 6 year olds are, self-generated content is increasing, like we've just described earlier, making pornographic content, but even 3 to 6 year olds are having access to predators in those digital spaces. So I always show parents, a video that Internet Matters produced showing, the front door opening and paedophiles literally just going up the stairs into a bedroom to chat to, it really hits home. Yeah. And I think the work of Internet Matters is it's a great website to keep informed for educators and parents on all aspects of these kind of difficult topics. I think they're very, very good.
And we have a question about resources available. Kathy, Nathan, Anna, do you have resources that you're developing or you can signpost our audience to that can support them to think through how they would scaffold this kind of conversation? Is there anything that you could help our audience with?
Yeah, well, I think like Kathy's just mentioned there, I'm the same. I'm always singing about Internet Matters, particularly in terms of parental controls. I think they are the best to go to. But the Internet Watch Foundation, the CEOP resources are great for both in-lesson resources, but also again, tools to help parents, how to video clips to sit and watch with children. To maybe for some that's an easier way to start. So rather than a parent or teacher thinking, how on earth do I bring this conversation up, it's like, right, let's just watch this clip together and then we can talk about it and start opening the conversation that way and taking it slowly. But I'm happy to list, I'll add my recommendations of there is more and more amazing companies out there doing great things to help.
Sorry, Anna, you've just reminded me, I meant Internet Watch Foundation. So the Internet Watch Foundation is the go-to site for me. So I am aware of the work of Internet Matters. I got confused, but Internet Watch Foundation is exceptional. And they're the ones based in Cambridge doing all that incredibly important work.
And they have that report remove tool, don't they? Which again, I just don't think enough people know about. So I think is it with the NSPCC, they've developed that where now you can get nude images or images taken down. Obviously they can't guarantee it's never out there, but that resource for young people, anyone who's had an image shared of them that they want removing. And also they have the support behind that for young people who are then processing that experience and trying to overcome their own trauma or shame from whatever's happened. They've got trained professionals there who can support. Amazing resource, that we don't know enough about, and they need to be shared everywhere.
That's right. So the big ones: Internet Matters, Internet Watch Foundation, ChildNet that somebody's mentioned, SaferNet. Those are sort of the big ones. And I think it's important, if you are working with parents, don't overwhelm them. So just choosing a few key points that they can kind of digest. Bombarding them with too much information, we find, doesn't work either. In our organisation, we support 150 schools in 8 countries. So we have a digital platform of these kinds of resources. And one of the things I would say that we do is look at the intersection between all of these topics. So some of those organisations we've just mentioned will just focus on children's engagement with the digital world, whereas we're looking at all of the factors that happen within family life or within school environments that could contribute to those sorts of behaviours.
Well, we're just about at the end of our session, so I'm going to give our audience a moment to think if they have a last question. I'm not sure that. Oh, David, you've got your hand up.
I was going to say there was a question from David in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. So I put it in the chat, but it was just, first of all, Debbie and the team, Ollie, who are great friends of us at Youth Talk. Thank you for putting on today. It's been fascinating, worrying, insightful, all of the above. My question was just maybe to end, might be a good one. If the panel had 2 or 3 just top practical tips for parents. This is hard stuff for parents. What would those tips be to actually practically help them with this?
You see, you took my last question, David.
Oh, sorry.
I hadn't asked it. But thank you. Let me hand over to the audience, to the panel.
Sorry, I would say lean in, because if you are not the source of this information, the internet will be. So say to parents, nobody is better placed in the whole world to open up this dialogue. It can feel like turning over a stone, but if you remain calm, constructive, cool, and find age-appropriate language or visual metaphors that can appeal to your children, and you will find out that they know stuff already. Stay calm and have consistent dialogues, not just one big chat. You might be out in a walk with them. What have you seen? Side-by-side conversation, or saying, I've heard about an app called TikTok, or I've heard of OnlyFans, you might say to your 12-year-old. Have you heard? Do not be afraid of raising it, because the chances are they will have, and they are much safer when you have that warm, transparent dialogue. It's a protective asset. So don't expect schools to do all the heavy lifting. It's our job as parents, to really get into these topics and help raise a child in a very complex digital world.
Yeah. Also, sorry, Anna, go on.
No, I was just going to say I'd totally mirror that, and like I say, it's that thing of it's not the children's responsibility to come to us and have to find the way themselves to find the right words or to broach this. We almost need to preempt it. Like we've said, it is going to happen at some point, so let's make sure that we're opening those doors, having the conversations, normalizing the uncomfortable car rides, brilliant time to have a conversation because you don't have to look at each other. And for some children, that can be less awkward. And yeah, that whole remove that shame, and just I don't think we can say it enough to our children, as you keep mentioning with that really sad situation with Josh, of there's not a parent out there that wouldn't ever just look back and think, I just wish I'd got rid of my own embarrassment or awkwardness and had that conversation first, so that they know they can literally say anything to me and we'll deal with it together.
Yeah, I think I'd add, just to finish, avoiding judgmental terms and to validate feelings as well. But I think just to ask the question, because it's so important, but really to avoid those judgmental terms. But if anybody on the call would like to reach out to me, please feel free to drop me an email, because I could talk about this topic for about 3 days. So please feel free to reach out if you've got any concerns or questions, or if you can think I can help at all.
And Nathan's details will go out in the resource pack. But Nathan, would you be kind enough to pop it in the chat, and then people will have it now? I'll wind things up with a lighter story, perhaps. So I'm a grandma, and I was reading my 3-year-old grandson a bedtime story. In fact, I'd read him 3, 4, 5, 6 stories, and he wasn't going to sleep, and he wanted more, and I was falling asleep. So we found something online, one of the fairy stories we had been reading, and I thought this looked like nice images, nice cartoons, and we started to play it. Sadly, I fell asleep, not my grandson, but I did jolt awake after a couple of minutes, only to discover that this, what seemed like a really nice fairy story, was really graphic and content that I did not want my grandson exposed to. So I say lighter, but it is everywhere, isn't it? We even in reading a story, we have to be mindful. Nathan, thank you for popping your details in. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time.